He wasn't supposed to be home that early, but when he stepped through the front door, the house was silent, too silent. And when he opened the playroom door, his paralyzed sons were walking. "What did you do to them?" he asked, his voice shaking. But she didn't answer. She just knelt there, arms open, tears in her eyes, like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. 6 months earlier, that same house didn't have miracles. It had marble floors, vaulted ceilings, a private nurse on every floor, and a silence so heavy it felt like it could crush the walls. Billionaire Richard Coleman had lost everything in a single day. His wife, gone in a boating accident. His twin boys, barely pulled from the wreckage, left paralyzed from the waist down. Since then, 15 maids had come and gone. Some quit after one day. Others cried mid-shift and never came back. Therapists said the boys were emotionally locked away. Nurses said the house felt cursed. But Richard didn't believe in curses. He believed in grief. And grief had swallowed his home whole. He stopped talking. He stopped praying. And deep down, though he never said it out loud, he stopped believing anything could ever be healed. Until the day a woman named Abigail Spencer walked in. She came with nothing but a worn suitcase, calloused hands, and a quiet spirit that seemed to carry something more. She didn't promise miracles. She didn't ask questions. But as Richard would one day whisper through tears, God sent her. But before we begin, tap subscribe, like this video, and let us know where you're watching from. I hope this story reminds you that when people give up, God never does. And sometimes He sends someone exactly when the world says it's too late. The rain hadn't stopped all morning. It tapped against the tall windows like a clock no one could turn off, soft and steady, like the kind of rhythm that fills a house when no one speaks. The Coleman estate sat quiet on the hill, a grand stone mansion that once held summer parties and Christmas choirs. Now it held only silence, not peace, just silence. Inside, everything was still. Furniture sat untouched. Toys sat exactly where they'd been the day before and the day before that. There were no fingerprints on the windows anymore, no giggles echoing down the marble hall, just 2 small wheelchairs parked by the front window side by side, motionless. 4-year-old Leo had his chin resting in his palm. His brother Noah held a stuffed giraffe by the neck like he wasn't sure if he still liked it or not. Neither boy spoke. Neither boy moved. The housekeeper had turned on the TV an hour ago just to fill the air, but even cartoons couldn't lift the weight. They never did. Upstairs, Richard Coleman stood by the railing of the grand staircase, looking down at his sons from the shadows. His tie was half loosened, shirt untucked. He hadn't shaved in days, hadn't eaten since last night. He didn't know how to be in this house anymore, not since the accident. He'd built empires, signed billion-dollar contracts, launched satellites into orbit. But now he couldn't even look his sons in the eyes without feeling like he'd failed. They looked too much like her. Amelia's smile, Amelia's eyes, Amelia's spirit, all still there, trapped in 2 tiny bodies that no longer ran to him when he walked through the door. They just sat, quiet, waiting for something no one could name. The 15th maid had left 2 days ago, didn't even finish folding the laundry. She'd made it 5 shifts. One morning, she walked past the boys without saying a word, went straight to the back door and drove off without her final check. She wasn't the first to do it. She probably wouldn't be the last. Richard hadn't argued, hadn't asked why. The grief in that house didn't need a reason. It lived in the walls now, in the spaces between footsteps. Some staff had started whispering when they thought he couldn't hear, calling the house unlucky, saying it was haunted, cursed, or worse, abandoned by God. Richard didn't correct them. Maybe they were right. Downstairs, a knock echoed from the front door. The butler opened it, revealing a small woman wrapped in a soaked brown coat, holding a duffel bag that had seen better days. Her umbrella hung lopsided from the wind. One spoke bent. She didn't apologize for the rain. She didn't rush in. She just nodded politely and stepped inside. Her name was Abigail Spencer. The agency had sent her after the last one left mid-week. The butler gave her a quick rundown. Rooms to clean, things to avoid, staff schedules. He spoke like a man who had repeated these instructions too many times. Abigail listened without interrupting. She didn't take notes, just looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, sir," when he was done. No one introduced her to the boys. They were still by the window, eyes glassy, backs straight. They didn't look up when she walked past, didn't blink when she softly said, "Good morning." But Abigail didn't pause. She didn't try to make them talk. She simply moved through the house with a quiet rhythm, like someone walking through a place of worship. Careful, not afraid, just respectful. She didn't clean like she was doing a job. She folded blankets like someone might still need comfort. She dusted picture frames like the memories inside still mattered. And as she passed the photo of Amelia on the hallway table, she smiled, not wide, just enough, and whispered, "I'm here now." No one heard her say it. No one but God. The sun didn't rise so much as it softened the darkness. By morning, the rain had stopped. But the clouds stayed, thick, grey and heavy, like the sky wasn't quite ready to let go. Inside the Coleman estate, the day began as it always did. Quietly. Too quietly. The nurse passed the boys their breakfast trays without much conversation. They didn't ask for anything. They rarely did. Leo stared at his oatmeal without touching it. Noah picked at the corner of his toast until it crumbled. Neither looked up when the TV came on. Richard was already in his study, door closed, blinds drawn. He hadn't spoken to the boys yet. He hadn't asked about the new maid. He didn't need to. He'd seen her, barely, when she arrived the day before. Quiet, unassuming, another name he'd forget by the end of the week. He figured she'd leave like the others. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Abigail woke early, they always did, long before the other staff. She washed her hands in the sink and looked at her reflection in the hallway mirror, not to check her face, but to gather herself. She whispered a prayer under her breath. Not loud, not for anyone else to hear, just enough for God. Use me today however you choose, even if no one sees it. Then she started. She didn't rush. She didn't ask for direction. She moved through the halls with a quiet care, like someone who'd learned a long time ago that some things don't need fixing, they just need tending to. She straightened a framed photo on the stairwell, Amelia in a summer dress, holding the boys when they were toddlers. She wiped a fingerprint from the edge, not because it was dirty, but because it mattered. In the living room, she found a toy car half hidden under the couch. She placed it gently on the rug near the boys' wheelchairs. She didn't say whose it was. She didn't ask if they wanted it. She just returned it. By mid-morning, she was folding laundry near the kitchen window when she heard the wheels. Small, slow. She turned her head, not suddenly, just enough, and saw Leo, watching her. He didn't speak, but he looked at her. Abigail smiled, soft and small, like she was smiling for a friend, not for effect. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, folding a towel into a perfect square. "I was wondering who wore these little socks." Leo didn't answer, but he didn't wheel away either. That was enough. Later, while dusting the upstairs landing, Abigail paused at a door that was slightly ajar. Inside, Richard sat at his desk, unmoving, staring at a blank computer screen. He hadn't noticed her. She could have kept walking, but something made her stop. She cleared her throat gently, just once. He turned. Their eyes met, briefly. "I apologize," she said. "Didn't mean to interrupt." Her voice was calm, not nervous, not proud, just present. Richard nodded, barely, said nothing, returned his gaze to the desk. She left without another word. By afternoon, Abigail had made her way to the boys' shared room. 2 beds, matching comforters, books untouched on the shelf. She didn't rearrange. She didn't redecorate. She just sat on the floor between their beds, cross-legged, with a small piece of paper and a set of colored pencils. No one asked her to. She drew slowly. A crooked sun, a lopsided tree, and 2 stick-figure boys holding hands beneath the words, "You are strong." She placed the drawing on the nightstand and left the room. That night, the nurse reported something strange to Richard. "The boys smiled today," she said. He raised a brow. Smiled? Just a little, the nurse said. At the drawing. Richard didn't respond, but later, after the house went still, he checked the hallway camera. He watched the footage in silence, Abigail sitting there on the floor, crayons in hand, quiet as a prayer. No teaching, no therapy, no commands, just presence. He paused the video, stared at the image for a long time, then closed the screen and whispered, just under his breath, "Who are you?" The house woke up slower than usual. No alarms, no sharp voices, just the hush of morning light pressing through the tall windows like a gentle invitation. In the boys' room, the drawing still sat on the nightstand. 2 stick-figure boys, hand in hand. "You are strong," scrawled in green crayon beneath their feet. It hadn't been moved, but it had been looked at. Leo's eyes kept returning to it, not constantly, not obviously, but enough that the nurse noticed. He didn't touch it. He didn't smile. But something was different. He was awake and in a way that hadn't been there for months. Downstairs, Abigail was already folding blankets in the sitting room. Her movements were slow, not from laziness, but from care, like she believed every wrinkle held memory. She hummed under her breath. Not loudly, not to be noticed, just enough to remind herself she was still here. A gospel tune, soft and steady. He gives strength to the weary, and to the broken he brings rest. She didn't expect anyone to hear it, but someone did. Noah from the hallway. He'd been wheeled there by the nurse, hoping the sunlight might help. But his chair had stopped near the entrance, and he was listening. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his fingers, which usually stayed clenched in his lap, began to tap gently against the plastic armrest, like he was keeping time. Abigail didn't look up. She didn't rush to say anything. She just kept folding, steady, reverent, like she didn't want to scare the moment away. Upstairs, Richard sat in his office with the door open for the first time in weeks. He couldn't explain why. Maybe he'd grown tired of being alone with his silence. Maybe he was listening too. Later that afternoon, something happened. Small, barely noticeable. But for a house like theirs, it was enough to shift the air. Abigail walked past the boys' play area, carrying a basket of folded towels. She glanced toward them as she always did, soft, respectful, not expecting anything. Then she paused. Leo had one hand on the arm of his chair, the other hovering over the crayons she'd left the day before. He didn't notice her watching. He was staring at the paper. His lips moved, not speaking but forming shapes, practicing something maybe. Noah turned slightly in his chair, and then, like it had been waiting weeks to escape, the smallest laugh slipped from Leo's throat. Short, breathless, but real. Abigail stood frozen. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just let it happen. The boys looked at each other, and for the first time since the accident, they smiled. It didn't last long, but it didn't need to. Joy had made it past the door. That night, Richard sat at the dinner table for the first time in weeks. He hadn't meant to. He'd come down to grab a file and found himself walking past the dining room, where the boys were seated, where Abigail was setting out napkins like it was Sunday lunch, and not just another day in a broken house. She looked up when she saw him, nodded. "Evening, sir." He paused. His mouth opened slightly, like he wanted to respond, but wasn't sure what would come out. Instead, he sat. No one said much. Noah dropped his fork. Leo poked at his peas. Abigail poured water into glasses like they were in a family kitchen, not a forgotten estate. Richard watched them. For a moment he forgot to keep his distance, and when he glanced toward the hallway mirror, he barely recognized himself. That night, he stood outside the boys' room listening. The TV was off. The lights were low, and just before he turned to leave, he heard it. A soft, high voice, full of quiet trust. "Good night, Abby." A single tear fell before he could stop it. He let it fall, and for the first time in half a year he whispered into the empty hallway, "Thank you." It started with a whisper, barely a word, not even that, just a sound, soft and breathy, like something remembered from a dream. Abigail had been placing clean pajamas on the boys' beds when she heard it. She turned gently. Noah was watching her. His lips moved again. "Abby," he whispered. She froze, not from shock, but from reverence, as if someone had opened the door to a sacred moment, and she didn't dare step too loudly inside. Leo looked at his brother, eyes wide, then back at her. Abigail knelt between them, the pajamas still folded in her hands, and smiled like she'd known that word was coming. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "I'm right here." Noah didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was different now, not empty but waiting. Upstairs, Richard hadn't heard it, but something had shifted in him too. He'd found himself walking past the playroom that morning, slowly, not entering, just pausing. There was laughter now, faint, inconsistent, unsure of itself. But it was there. And it was hers, Abigail's laughter, deep and kind, the kind that rolls up from the belly like it knows sorrow but chooses joy anyway. Richard stood in the hallway listening, unsure what to feel. He hadn't laughed since Amelia died. Not really. Smiles felt too expensive now, like currency he couldn't afford. And yet, there it was. Life. In his house. He walked back to his study without going in. He wasn't ready. But that evening, after dinner, he lingered near the kitchen while Abigail folded dish towels by the sink. She didn't notice him at first. Or maybe she did, and simply waited. He cleared his throat softly. "The boys," he said, his voice low. "They've been different lately." Abigail looked up, gave a small nod. "Yes, sir." He hesitated, hand still on the doorway. You did that?" She paused, not to think but to choose her words carefully. "I didn't do anything, sir," she said gently. "They just needed space and love and time." He studied her, the way she folded each towel like it had worth, the way she stood without needing to defend herself. Something about her presence disturbed him, not in a bad way, in a way he didn't know how to name. He wanted to ask more. Instead, he nodded and walked away. But her words followed him long after he left. That night, Richard dreamt of water. Dark water. Endless. He was alone in it, searching for something he couldn't see. And then, two small voices calling out his name. He woke before dawn, breath caught in his throat. When he stepped into the hallway, the entire house was still asleep, except one. Abigail. She was in the sitting room, kneeling by the window, her hands folded in prayer, not for attention, not for show, just her and God, and whatever pain she was laying down. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her, a woman who didn't try to fix his house, but was somehow healing it anyway. He stepped back before she saw him. Later that morning, as the boys ate breakfast, Leo looked up mid-bite. "Abby, will you sit with us?" His voice was clear, soft, but steady. Richard, just walking into the room, froze. Abigail smiled. "Of course, baby," she said, pulling up a chair. "I'd love to." Richard stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. He felt like a man watching something bloom in soil he'd believed was dead. But instead of joy, the first thing he felt was guilt. Where had he been all this time? What kind of father lets a stranger see the light in his sons before he does? He turned before anyone noticed and walked back down the hall. His footsteps were quiet, but his heart was not. It started with a spoon, not a miracle, not a headline, just a metal spoon in a small hand, lifted, trembling, toward a waiting mouth. Leo's. The oatmeal spilled before it reached his lips, half of it landing in his lap. But he laughed, a real belly-deep laugh, like it wasn't failure, but victory. Across the table, Abigail clapped softly, grinning wide. "Good try, baby," she said, dabbing his chin with a napkin. "That was real good." Noah smiled too, his fingers wrapped tightly around a crayon. They were trying. And in a house like this, trying was everything. Richard saw it through the doorway. He hadn't meant to stop, but the sound of laughter had pulled him in like a thread through cloth. He watched them, both boys engaged, alert, alive, and her, always her, sitting in the middle of their world like she'd always been there. He stayed quiet, observing, like someone afraid to enter something sacred. Later that day, he asked the physical therapist to give him the full report. She looked surprised. It was the first time he'd asked. "They're responding," she said, setting the folder on his desk. "Better posture, more focus, increased strength." She paused. "They're making progress I haven't seen in months." Richard opened the folder. Inside, a chart of muscle response, some colored drawings. A photo clipped to the back. It showed Leo holding himself upright without back support. Noah gripping a walker with both hands. His throat tightened. "Who took this?" he asked. The therapist hesitated. "The maid," she said softly. "Abigail. She's been helping during sessions." Richard didn't answer. He just stared at the image. It didn't look staged. It looked real, like something growing in the quiet. That afternoon, Abigail led the boys to the sunroom, their favorite place now. The wheelchair tires creaked gently against the tile. She placed 2 stuffed animals on opposite ends of the room. "Race you," she said. Leo laughed. "We can't race," he said, grinning. "We don't go fast." Abigail raised an eyebrow. "Who told you that?" Noah looked at his brother, then down at his hands, and slowly, deliberately, pushed his wheels forward. Leo followed. It wasn't fast, it wasn't smooth, but it was movement. Abigail cheered, not loud, just enough to make them laugh again. The boys pushed harder, determination written across their faces like a war cry in crayon. And then, just as they reached their stuffed prizes, Richard walked in. He froze. The boys saw him and stopped, panting, sweating, smiling. Noah lifted his stuffed bear like a trophy. Richard's mouth opened, but no words came. "You're walking," he finally whispered. Leo looked down at his wheels, then up. Sort of. The silence that followed was heavy, not with grief, but with disbelief. Richard turned to Abigail. His voice cracked. "What did you do?" She stood slowly, her hands clasped in front of her apron. "I didn't do anything," she said. "They did." Richard's eyes filled, but he didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. Not here. That night he found her in the kitchen, folding towels at the counter. He stood in the doorway for a long time. She didn't turn. She didn't speak. She waited. "You're not just a maid," he said finally. Abigail folded one more towel before answering. "No, sir, I'm not." He stepped closer. "Why are you really here?" Abigail looked at him, calm, steady. "Because someone had to stay." Richard lowered his gaze. "I thought I'd lost them." "You didn't." "And what about you?" he asked quietly. "What did you lose?" Her eyes softened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the hallway, where laughter had started again. Small, fragile, but real. "I think," she said slowly, "we're all trying to come back to life." Abigail stood at the window of her small upstairs room, the one tucked behind the laundry hall where no one ever knocked. Outside, the last of the autumn leaves spun across the driveway like they weren't ready to let go. She held a small silver locket in her hand. It was warm from being pressed against her skin all day. She opened it gently. Inside, 2 photos, faded, tucked behind glass. One was of her sister, Yvette. Bright smile, curls wild, eyes that looked too alive to ever leave. The other, a hospital wristband, frayed at the edges. She traced it with her thumb. "You were always stronger than me," she whispered. There'd been a time when Abigail prayed for healing and got silence. When she'd begged a system to see her sister's pain, and they handed her forms and waiting rooms, she knew what it felt like to watch someone fade, to sit beside a hospital bed and realize you were powerless. It's why she stayed now, why she hummed to broken children and wiped floors like it meant something. Because she couldn't save Yvette, but maybe she could help someone else rise from the wreck. Downstairs, laughter echoed faintly through the house. The boys were learning to play again, not just with toys but with each other. Their bond, once dulled by trauma, had started to spark again. Richard had noticed. He came to meals now, sat at the table, sometimes even smiled. And when he passed Abigail in the halls, he nodded, not out of formality but recognition. Something unspoken had begun to bloom between them, until tonight. She had gone to the pantry to refill the cereal bin when she heard voices from the study. The door wasn't shut. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words reached her anyway. Richard, and another man, maybe his lawyer. "She's done more than we expected," the man said, "but we should still think long-term. Certified pediatric therapy in home care teams, something official." "And what about Abigail?" Richard asked. "She's been helpful, clearly, but helpful isn't qualified. You said yourself. This can't last on hope alone." There was silence. Then Richard's voice, low, measured. "She'll understand." Abigail stepped back from the doorway before she realized she'd been holding her breath. "She'll understand." She returned the cereal bin to the counter, empty. That night, she didn't sing to the boys as she tucked them in. She smiled. She kissed their foreheads. But her eyes were somewhere else. In her room, she opened her journal, the one she never let anyone see. She wrote one line. "God, if I was only meant to pass through, please don't let me break before I go." She didn't cry, but something inside her folded in on itself. The next morning, she moved a little slower. Her voice was soft as always, but there was a distance to it now, a carefulness, as if she was already packing up inside her heart. The boys didn't notice, not yet, but Richard did. He passed her in the hallway and paused. "Everything all right?" She looked at him, measured her words. "Of course, sir." He opened his mouth to say something, but didn't, and maybe that silence was what hurt most. Later that evening, after the boys had gone to sleep, she found herself back in the sitting room, hands folded, knees to the floor. This time, her prayer wasn't whispered. "I don't need praise," she said. "I don't need to stay forever. But if I'm meant to finish this, then let me finish it." A tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Across the hallway, Richard stood in shadow, again. He hadn't meant to listen. But the words sank in deeper than he wanted them to, and for the first time since she arrived, he wondered, not what she was doing there, but whether he'd be the one to send her away. The house was quiet again, not the soft quiet that had begun to fill it lately. Laughter under blankets, whispered bedtime stories, the hum of Abigail's morning songs. This was the old quiet, the heavy one, the kind that filled your chest like water and made you forget how to breathe. Abigail moved through the halls without speaking. She still made the boys' beds, still folded their socks, still laid out breakfast and whispered good morning. But something in her presence had changed. Not colder, just further away, like she was already learning how to leave without making noise. Leo noticed first. At lunch, he held out his cup for more juice and waited, longer than usual. Abigail poured it carefully. "Thank you," he said. She smiled. "You're welcome." But she didn't sit beside them like she always did. Didn't ask about their blocks or what color they wanted to paint today. She just went back to the sink and stayed there, staring out the window, though nothing was happening outside. Later that day, Richard walked into the sunroom, expecting to find the boys with Abigail. Instead, they were alone. Quiet. Still. Noah looked up at him. "Where's Abby?" he asked. Richard hesitated. "She's just taking a break." Leo frowned. "Did she leave?" Richard shook his head, but slowly, uncertainly. "No, she's here." But even he wasn't sure anymore. That evening, the twins overheard something they weren't meant to. A conversation, behind a closed door. Richard, and the same man from the study. Another plan, another arrangement. Words like qualified care and placement transition. Noah pressed his ear against the wall. Leo sat on the floor beside him, holding his stuffed giraffe a little tighter than usual. By bedtime they were silent again, not because they were tired, but because something old had returned. Fear, not the fear of nightmares, the fear of being left behind. When Abigail came to turn down their beds, they didn't speak. When she kissed their foreheads, they didn't smile. She saw it, felt it, and it nearly broke her. She turned off the light, closed the door, and stood in the hallway, eyes wet, breath shaking. Richard was already there, waiting. She didn't start the conversation. He did. "They think you're leaving," he said quietly. She nodded, didn't look at him. "They're not wrong." Silence stretched between them. Then, "I didn't mean for you to hear what you heard." "But I did," she said, "and you didn't correct him." Richard stepped forward. His voice was low, regretful. "You have to understand. I was trying to plan for what comes next. For them." She looked at him then, finally, and when she did, there was no anger, only ache. "You think I don't want what's best for them?" she asked. "You think I'm enough for this job?" "I think you've done more than I ever expected," he said. "That's the truth." "Then say it plainly," she whispered. "Am I just a placeholder?" Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. She waited, but the silence answered for him. She turned to go, but stopped, one hand still on the wall. "I stayed because I saw something in them, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. But don't forget, they saw something in me too." She walked away before he could respond. That night, Abigail packed her Bible and her journal into her bag. She didn't decide to leave, but she needed to be ready, just in case someone else made the decision for her. In the boys' room, Noah whispered into the dark, "She's leaving." Leo didn't answer, but he turned his face to the wall, and for the first time in weeks he cried. It was just past 7 when Abigail stepped into the hallway with her bag in hand. The house was still quiet, too early for breakfast, too late to turn back. She paused by the front door. She hadn't decided whether to leave, not yet, but she had packed everything, just in case. Just in case this was the moment where it all ended, where love had done all it could, and it still wasn't enough. Upstairs, Richard sat on the edge of his bed holding a photo of Amelia. She was laughing in it, wind in her hair, sunlight on her face, the boys barely toddlers on her lap. He hadn't looked at this one in a while. He used to think the pain would fade. That grief would dull over time like old metal, but it hadn't. It had just changed shape, moved into new places. Guilt, silence, distance. And now, a question he couldn't escape. Was he about to lose the one person who brought life back into this house? Down the hall, Leo was wide awake. So was Noah. Neither of them spoke, but they knew. When someone's about to leave, truly leave, something shifts in the air. You can feel it, and they felt it now. Noah pulled the covers back. Leo gripped the side of his bed. No nurse was there, no instructions, no plan. But the two of them, quietly, clumsily, began to move. Noah reached for his walker, Leo for the arm of his chair. There was no sound but breathing, and a single whispered word. "Try." Abigail had reached the door, hand on the handle, still unsure. And then she heard it. A sound, not a knock, not a voice. A shuffle. She turned. From the far end of the hallway she saw them, the boys, not in their chairs, not sitting, walking. One clumsy step at a time, braces clicking softly against the hardwood, arms outstretched, shaking, reaching. Leo's hand gripped Noah's. Noah's eyes locked on hers. "Abby," he breathed. "We did it." The bag dropped from her shoulder. She ran, fast and breathless, toward them, knelt on the floor as they reached her, her arms wrapped around them like wings. Tears poured freely now, not from pain, but from something deeper, relief, joy, a resurrection she hadn't expected this soon. Behind her, a sound. Richard. He had come down the stairs, slowly, carefully, and now he stood frozen at the edge of the room. His eyes filled before he could stop them. He took one step forward, then two, and finally he sank to his knees beside them. He reached for his boys, one hand on each shoulder, and said the only words that could find their way out. "I thought I'd lost you. Leo looked up, smiled, just a little. Noah reached for his father's hand. Abigail stepped back to give them space, her heart still pounding, her chest full of wonder. Richard turned to her. There were no formalities now, no walls, just truth. "I was wrong," he whispered. "You weren't just helping them heal, you were helping me too." She didn't speak at first. The moment didn't need more words. But then, gently, she said, "I didn't come to fix anything, I just came to stay." Later that night, the house was filled with something it hadn't held in a very long time. Peace, not silence, not grief, but real peace. The boys fell asleep early, worn out from victory. Abigail sat by the window, holding her Bible in her lap. The locket still hung around her neck. But this time, when she opened it, she smiled. Morning light drifted through the Coleman estate, like a gentle promise. Not dramatic, just faithful. Soft beams settled across the hallway floors, touched the framed photos on the staircase wall, and poured through the open doors of the sunroom, where Leo and Noah were already wide awake, giggling over a board game neither of them really knew how to play. They were sitting upright. No nurse beside them, no therapist correcting posture. Just two little boys learning how to laugh again. Their wheelchairs stood nearby, empty, still needed, still part of the story, but no longer the whole of it. Abigail stood in the kitchen, humming as she flipped pancakes on the stove. She'd been up since dawn, not because she had to, because she wanted to. There was joy in these mornings now, in the rhythm of small things, folding napkins, pouring orange juice, hearing the boys argue gently over who won yesterday's race. The house was still quiet, but it was no longer empty. Richard stepped into the room just as she turned off the burner. He looked different now. Not dramatically so, but the change was there, in the way he carried himself, in the way his eyes didn't drift away anymore when they met hers. "They asked if you'd sit with them," he said. Abigail smiled. "I will." She reached for a plate, but he took it from her hand. "I've got it," he said gently. "You've done enough this morning." For a moment neither of them moved, and then he added almost under his breath, "I never thanked you. Not properly." Abigail turned, folding her hands lightly in front of her apron. "You didn't have to." "I think I did," he said. "You stayed when everyone else left. You didn't try to fix them. You just believed in them, and in me, even when I didn't." She nodded, eyes soft. "That wasn't me," she whispered. "That was God." Richard looked down for a moment, not out of shame but awe. "I stopped praying after Amelia died," he said. "Stopped believing anyone was listening." Abigail stepped closer. "He was listening," she said. "You just couldn't hear it over the grief." He let the words settle. Then, quietly, "And what about you? Why did you really stay?" She looked toward the sunroom, where the boys were now waving, calling for her. "Because I remember what it's like," she said. "To lose someone and feel invisible, to think no one will come. I stayed because I believe healing isn't always about medicine. Sometimes it's about presence." Richard nodded, tears brimming but held in place. "Then stay," he said. "Not as staff, not as someone passing through." He paused, his voice catching. "Stay as part of our lives." That night, the Coleman family sat on the porch for the first time. Not as patient and caregiver, not as billionaire and employee, as people, as family. Leo and Noah sat between them, chattering about everything and nothing. Stars blinked overhead, quiet and faithful. And when Richard reached over and took Abigail's hand, she didn't flinch. She simply smiled, not wide, just enough. Weeks passed, seasons shifted, and the house that once felt like a mausoleum began to live again. Music played in the afternoons. Footsteps echoed down the halls. Laughter, real, loud, uncontained, became a daily rhythm. The boys walked more now, not always steadily, not always without help, but always with joy. Richard started a foundation in Amelia's name, a quiet act of redemption. And Abigail? She never packed that bag again. She stayed. Sometimes in the evening, Richard would find her by the window with her Bible open in her lap and her locket resting on the pages. He'd ask her what she was thinking, and she'd always say the same thing. I'm thinking about how grace doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it just shows up quietly and stays. If this story moved you, don't walk away just yet. There are more hearts waiting to be healed, more voices waiting to be heard, and more quiet miracles just like this one. At Elevated Heart Stories, we don't just tell stories, we bring you into the room where grace walks in and hope decides to stay. Subscribe, stay a while, and let your heart be elevated, because sometimes one story really can change everything.